Welcome to Stone Cold Stros. I'm Brandon Strange with Charlie Palillo and Josh Jordan. Follow them on X at Palillo and at Josh Jordan 975 and read their work on sportsmap.com. On today's episode, the Astros offer to Bregman reportedly goes up, but the chances of landing him go down, and why Houston's bullpen could be ripe with opportunities, but who's ready to capitalize? We have some ideas. Before we get going, just a reminder, please hit like on the video, subscribe to the channel, click the bell for notifications so you know when new content drops. And if you're on the go, we're on all your favorite podcast apps. Just search Stone Cold Stros. Gents, last week we saw reports from John Heyman and KPRC's Ari Alexander that had Houston improving its offer. However, the details of what that actually meant are still not clear. Buster Only then says this week that the Bregman sweepstakes is down to Chicago, Red Sox, and Tigers. Are you guys buying that Houston blinked in any way in the Bregman negotiations? Or was this just more Scott Boras smokescreen?
Hey, you can report what sources tell you, but if your sources are full of crap as they're telling it to you, it doesn't mean the guts of the report are accurate. Unless Jim Crane has been gobbling stupid pills, the Astros upgrading an offer to Bregman from 6-156 would just be idiotic, as we've discussed here for weeks. It feels like decades about now, but for weeks, why bid against yourself? No one has come in over the top of 6-156 unless it's an imbecile elsewhere, in which case, as Mother Gump told Forrest, stupid is as stupid does. Let them do it.
If they did sweeten the deal, I think it was a small factor. We heard the complaints where Bregman was like, well, I don't want to take a pay cut in my AAV. So maybe they moved some money from the back end of the 6-year deal, front loaded a little bit to get his salary up, at least the average salary. Maybe they did something like that. But I'm just starting to think that part of this, it's the typical Astros thing, right? Oh, we made an offer to Correa. They do a lot of these things where they make an offer so the fan base feels like they're in on it, but they know it's not a super competitive offer, which in this case, I'm kind of fine with. I didn't think they really needed to up the offer. I'm really starting to think we're going to see a smaller deal. I think we could see history repeat itself a little bit here. I foresee something like what Correa got the first time around, like 3 years, $105 million with opt-out, something like that. And then Bregman hopes that he can add on to that deal. I think that's kind of where we are. I'm also hearing Harold Reynolds, who they talked about Buster Olney's report. His sources are telling him it's the Cubs. So, we talked about it last week that's a terrible ballpark for Bregman, a guy that specializes in hitting doubles, and he might have trouble getting some home runs to left field there. So, but it's a good ball club. He's got some friendly faces there, but you're not getting that 6 years. So I just think this is Boras doing his thing where we're going to front load this deal and then try to go back to market with it. I just don't see any other team coming in and paying more than the Astros on a 6-year type deal. I just don't buy it.
And whatever Bregman's actual options are, hey, he can pick among them. And what will he value apart from who's offering the most money coupled with the most years? And if that's judged to be 6 on one hand, half a dozen on the other, because it's more money up front with an opt-out and a shorter deal versus, taking the sure thing of guaranteed money, because Alex Bregman is extremely unlikely to be a really good player when he's 35, 36 years of age. So you just have to be really dumb to say, okay, we'll go 6 years, 156 or more at this point. But if it's the Cubs, great ballpark, great city to live in the summer months, and an absolute contender in the National League Central. In fact, if Bregman were to pick the Cubs, it might tip the scales to the Cubs being the favorite in the National League Central. Also for the Cubs, he would be their third baseman, where their stud prospect, Matt Shaw, would get bumped to second base, where they have a Gold Glove second baseman, Nico Horner, but he might not be ready to start the season coming off surgery, and depth is always a good thing. And the Cubs can nudge Bregman into their payroll and still be just under the first CBT threshold. If it's the Red Sox, Alex Bregman's going to second base. And while Boras put that out there just as an element to stoke the market, Alex Bregman hasn't played the middle infield in years. He could not play a good major league shortstop, I do not believe, at this stage of his career. Second base, not the same level of requirements as a shortstop, but how would he take to it? And then the ego component. Wait, I just won a gold glove at third base. Everyone knows I'm a better third baseman than Rafael Devers, but I'm the one who has to move. Well, yes, the power of incumbency, Alex. They're not going to move Devers to second base. And then there's the Detroit factor, which is not a great baseball city, where they were drawing crowds while in the race in September in the teens, as opposed to Fenway, Wrigley, two of the most vibrant environments in all of Major League Baseball. So does going to a Tigers team in a mediocrity-laden American League Central, where you have a chance to contend, but do you have a chance to be really, really good? Is he that tethered to A.J. Hinch as a real tipper in the mix? And I suppose in the idiot, imbecile, moron category, we should still include Toronto, which is already well into the tax, but they're owned by a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate in Rogers Communications. So if they think that will help get Vlad Guerrero to re-sign, right? They're in with the Sharks in the AL East, the Yankees, the Orioles, the Red Sox on the come with the best collection of prospects at the top end of any team in baseball right now. So if there's one team that says, okay, Breggy, we'll give you that 6,156 and then some to smooth over the Canadian dollar issues and taxes. But just get this over with already. Hey, spring training is about here. Pitchers and catchers Thursday. If Bregman wants to wait much beyond that, he's entitled to, but a lot of people will be laughing at him.
To your point, Charlie, when it comes to the reporting, it's garbage in, garbage out. But by all accounts, Houston still seems to have the best offer on the table. At the moment, I know it's harder to separate the frustrating reports between what's happening and all the waiting versus Alex Bregman, the person. Obviously, we wish him best personally. But this hasn't really been handled in a way that endears himself to Houston fans. I have to ask, in your guys' opinion, do you think that he was ever coming back to Houston? Because the reason why I ask that is if he ends up signing for somewhere else for a shorter deal, but yet he would only take 7 years, $180 million to come back to Houston, that sounds like the home team's having to pay a premium to retain Alex versus usually you think of a team in which you've won a championship with, usually they get the discount.
I don't think he's been seeking the escape hatch in this entire process, but he wanted back on his own terms. And then you get to ego. And there are guys who will take less money elsewhere because the incumbent didn't show me the love. You're disrespecting me, not offering me the max. Why did I have to go out and set my market? You should have just bowed down before me and listened to what Jose Altuve has to say about me. And that's not how it's worked out. And let me just add that it's part of how the journalism game works. Sometimes reporters be told, hey, can you get this out there for me? And you are reporting it accurately if it was told to you, even if it's not true. And you have a good idea that it's not true, but you're putting it out there to chase clicks and coverage and acknowledgement that such and such reports this or that. So it'll end how it will end, and then we can all play the 2020 hindsight game.
Speaking of playing games, I think that's what Scott Boras loves. And part of them rejecting the Astros offer early might have been just no, you're supposed to counter. You offer me this. I say, no, not quite. And then you come back and you're not playing the game, Jim Crane. But we kind of know from the past that Jim Crane doesn't like to play games. He likes to give you a fair offer. And if you don't want to be a part of the team for that, then they're going to move on and replace you with somebody else. Part of me thinks if they would have come to 6 years, 180 to where he's making $30 million every year, if the Astros would have done that, I think Bregman might have decided to return. But part of me too, does he really want to be here based off of what we're seeing? I'm not so sure. We know he sold his house last year. We know that him and Espada had some tension when he was moved down in the batting order last season. And through Bregman's agent, we reportedly heard he didn't like how he was communicated that information. Remember, Bregman was hitting awful, and they finally moved him down in the lineup. You know, another slow start. We're used to that here. And then we heard that Bregman was upset about it, how he was given that information. And And Bregman's done that in the past when they've tried to tinker with him in the batting order. He won't come out and say it, but you can tell by his facial expressions that stuff kind of bothers him. Is he super sure the Astros are committed to winning with them, with them trading Kyle Tucker and Dana Brown coming in and Jim Crane's reluctance to really want to keep anybody except for Jose Altuve? So there's probably other factors there. Maybe he's just kind of feels like it's time to move on, and maybe Houston's not a place where he has his best chance to win projecting forward. Maybe he feels like it's kind of in the past, that Astros dynasty.
Well, speaking of the Cubs, we've alluded to the bullpen depth over the past couple of episodes, and we'll get into that in just a little bit. Just a quick message. If you're a business owner and you'd like us to help spread the word about your service or product, you can contact our friends on the sales team at houston.sportsmap.com/advertise. The link is also in the video description. So, in reverse order, we know Hader's closing. We would assume Brian Abreu's coming in the eighth inning as the setup guy. But, who gets the ball in the sixth and seventh innings and long relief opportunities becomes pretty interesting, because there are a few guys who realistically could take next steps. What are some guys that you will be watching for as Joe Espada looks to bridge the starters to Abreu and Hader on the back end?
It's a slew of question marks. I think first dibs go to Taylor Scott, who was fantastic the first 4 months of last season, then faded down the stretch and wound up on the injured list to end the season. But a 2.23 earned run average, some nasty stuff. But that was his only good season in the major leagues. Now, at least he wasn't a free agent, so he couldn't get a Montero-type deal. But I think Scott, at this point, absolutely is third man on the totem pole. Who's getting spots in the bullpen after that? Most of them are settled. Caleb Ort is a lock. He works really cheap. Follow the theme on this. And Ort was excellent in his taste with the Astros, but it was basically 25 innings. Ditto Brian King, who's the one definite left-hander making the bullpen. He was solid too. Also, works very cheap. But also, through about 25 innings, his only consequential innings as a major leaguer. Forrest Whitley, the one-time prospect of all prospects, 27 years old, he still hasn't given up an earned run in the major leagues. Yeah, 3 1/3 innings as he finally cracked the majors, but a power arm, he's out of options. And who are the other options behind him? So there are 4 names there. And then there's a spot or 2 up for grabs. 2 spots if they're only going to carry 5 starters starting the season, which is what they're going to do, because they will not need a 6th starter until the 18th game of the season. So 3 full turns of the rotation with off days before they'll need a 6th starter. And Luis Garcia is not going to be ready to start the season anyway.
It's interesting. Joe Espada talked about this a little bit on Chandler Ohm's podcast, Crush City Territory, if you want to check it out on YouTube. And the first name that he brought up, Taylor Scott, as you mentioned, Charlie, he said, he pitched big innings for them last year. I trust him in high leverage spots. So that should tell you something. Second guy he mentioned, Brian King. He said, thought he threw the ball really, really well. I remember some opportunities against Bryce Harper where King went out there and did a really nice job against a tough lefty. And then he mentioned Forrest Whitley. Said, arm looks really good. He's excited about him. So, you got to temper those expectations for Forrest Whitley. We've been waiting for this to happen for years. It's so much of it's been health with him. And with somebody that throws that hard, it's tough to expect that all of a sudden he's going to be healthy, but fingers crossed, right? I noticed he didn't mention Montero, but I will say I wouldn't rule it out. If he's pitching well in the minors and they need somebody and they're already paying him so much damn money, they may take a shot on him at some point in the season. I saw on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, a couple days ago, AJ Blueball. I know he's a starter, but sometimes we see starters get called up to be used as bullpen guys. He was in a workout video hitting 98 miles an hour. So maybe that's something we can be excited about for the future there. And then you still have your Dubins and your Caleb Orts. There's still some other guys to mix in. And both of those guys, they did some good stuff at certain points in the season last year.
The last spot or 2 really don't matter. You're not asking your 12th, 13th pitchers on the staff to be important guys. And no team has 7 or 8 lockdown relievers. They're just not an infinite supply. Bennett Sousa lost last season to injury, another left-handed candidate if he shows well. And Espada says, hey, I'd like to carry two lefties in my pen. As long as the third and fourth guys settle in and pitch well, and Hader and Abreu are doing their job, the Astros bullpen is set up to be just fine.
I will be looking for opportunities for Brian King. Charlie, you mentioned it. He made his MLB debut last season. 32 strikeouts over 26 and a third innings, carrying a 2.39 ERA with a 1.14 WHIP. Josh, I too am curious whether Rafael Montero gets another look this season. To Charlie's point, he does not work cheap. Moving on here, the reason why we're getting so granular into these position groups this offseason is because it looks like the competition for the division is going to be really tight. We talked about how Robert Flores and some other media outlets predicting the Rangers to win the AL West. Baseball Prospectus's PECOTA standings, as of this recording, project the Rangers at 90.3 wins, with Houston just edging out Seattle 87.7 wins to 86.4 wins. Now, flip side of that is you have some sports books that the majority of sports books right now have the edge slightly to Houston over Rangers by a couple of wins. But every platform seems to agree that Houston is poised to finish basically around in that same area that they did last season. Now, I guess it depends on whether you're a glass half full or a glass half empty guy, but considering the attrition that this team will have seemingly suffered by the end of this offseason going into spring training, is finishing with the same record essentially actually a win, as the front office is trying to bridge this season with all the dead money to next season in which that money falls off? Is that actually a win?
Pretty easy for me. It's a win if you're in the playoffs. Right? Whatever financial hoops you were jumping through, trying to avoid the tax or willing to nudge into the first tax for the right in-season acquisition, if they're not in the playoffs, the season's a failure because there is no superpower poised to just blow past them in the American League West. And for a couple of years now, the Astros have been not close to a great team anymore. Obviously, they're not at this point. Right? They used to have win totals set in the mid to upper 90s, then dropped down to about 90, the total that won the division the last day of the season 2 years ago. Then it became 88 wins, didn't get to play 162. Maybe they'd have won number 89. And now the projected number is at about 87. So if you're the tallest person in the land of little people, it doesn't mean you're a giant, but it's get into the tournament. And let's add to that the American League Central, the Guardians, the Tigers, and the Twins. Their numbers are all about 83. The Royals are 82 or 83. So if 87 wins the American League West and gets you the second best record in the American League, meaning you don't have to play baseball Russian roulette, that best of three, then 87 can be a whopping win. But if 87 is just good enough for fourth in the wild card race, epic fail, end of Astros postseason streak.
I think the thought that it's kind of a transition year, Brandon, and if they can dump this money off the books and then go do something moving forward, and that's considered a win because they make the playoffs, I can see that a little bit. But you're using another year of Jose Altuve in his mid-30s. I don't think he's going to get better 2 years from now. Yordan Alvarez, the injuries continue to pile up for him. He's getting older too. So I would kind of prefer to strike while the iron's hot. Also, the Astros, they don't like to really pay top dollar in free agency. So it's not like, after they dump this money off the books, I think they're going to go out and pay somebody else $200 or $300 million next year. That's not going to happen. They're just going to make some small moves near the margins and hope that Christian Walker works out and doesn't age too quickly. I did pull the numbers from my bookie, their sports book. I use them quite a bit right before the show. They're a little more favorable, the Astros. So the AL West, they have the Astros with the most wins at 88.5, Rangers behind them 85.5, Mariners behind them 83.5, and then Mariners at 83.5, Angels 71.5, and then A's 70.5. So that's kind of how they see the AL West shaking out. So that's a good thing that Vegas has the Astros up. They're at least close to 90 wins. That feels a little aggressive to me, but for me, it's the pitching. If the pitching can be really good and the offense can at least just kind of get you by, be similar to last year, if they can score more runs, the OPS doesn't have to go up. If they can have more timely hitting, work longer at bats, I think that's why maybe Christian Walker would be a good addition, somebody that's not up there swinging at the first pitch all the time. I think they need to go back to that approach of being a little more patient, passing the baton to the guy behind you.
Just a little quickie additional perspective on this. And of course, their projections. And we say Las Vegas, but now with all the online, you can find numbers set all over the place. But Las Vegas leads the way in setting the numbers. They're set based on all their power ratings, but also on how they think the public money is going to come in, right? They don't want 90% of people betting an over. So in that 87, 88 range, there are exactly two teams in the American League projected to win more games than the Astros, the Yankees and the Orioles. So transition, angst of Tucker gone, and that the Astros just turtled on being willing to pay anywhere close to what might be going rate for a prime player in his prime years. Again, that's why giving Bregman 6 years at his money is stupid. If you wouldn't give Tucker 7-8 years, a much better player, that kind of money a year earlier when he was 3 years younger than Bregman is now. Anyway, if the Astros wind up with the third best record in the American League, what's to complain about?
There's also the likelihood that Houston could stand pat and keep the powder dry until the trade deadline to kind of reassess and reevaluate where they're at. What's your gut tell you about how aggressive the front office will be at the deadline should they find themselves in a dead heat in the division?
Yeah, and if you're in a really close race, which doubles as the wild card race, man, that was the Yusei Kikuchi play last season. Again, the state of the Astros farm system, can they bid at the high end? And he would not be a fit here unless Bregman's gone. Paredes is a disaster. You want to move him to second, Altuve to left full time, and let's rent Vlad Guerrero for 2 months. And the Astros don't have the prospects to make an offer on a guy like that. But this also ties into when your farm system is so callow and shallow. It makes it tougher to go after the blockbuster trade acquisition if someone is on the market, coupled with the fact, you're just not developing enough young talent and cheap talent to complement what you have as more experienced and obviously higher paid players. As we've discussed before, not one guy the Astros gave up in the Verlander trade, not one guy they gave up in the Garrett Cole trade or in the Zach Greinke trade has become a quality major leaguer. Jake Rogers, the Tigers catcher, is the closest to it, and he's a good receiver, no hit kind of guy. But the Astros had prospects who at that time were evaluated highly enough to be prime trade pieces for uber high-end players on the board. They don't have that now. So it's kind of a double whammy. You're not helping from within, and it inhibits your ability to help from without. But if you're in a hammer and tong race, how can you say at the deadline, we can't do anything, our hands are financially tied, if you're not even at the first tax?
I'm kind of going the other way. I don't think they're going to do a lot. I think they're going to try and do everything they can to stay under this competitive balance tax, reset it so that you don't have those extra penalties. That's just how I see. I think last year was a unique circumstance where, you're pulling up Jake Bloss his first year to have to pitch in your starting rotation, and then he gets hurt and Verlander's hurt. I think the Kikuchi thing was they didn't have any warm bodies. I think that was more of a unique circumstance. I think the way this rotation is set up with who's getting healthy, what you have in the minors, I don't expect them to have to make a deal where they have to give up a lot of prospects for a starting pitcher. At least I hope that's not the case. But I just think this is one of those years where they're going to say, this is what you got, Joe Espada. Do the best you can with it, and we'll worry about next year. I just think that's where if they wanted to go all in and make a splash, I think it would have been with Bregman. And so I don't think they're going to do it. I think they just tried to entertain it long enough for the fan base. They were just surprised that he sat out there so long. So they had to make it look like they were still interested because Bregman was still a free agent coming up on, pitchers and catchers reporting.
Good thoughts. We'll cut it there. That's going to be it for this episode of Stone Cold Stros. If you're watching on YouTube, be sure to click like on the video. And if you're listening on a podcast, we do have a favor. Give us a 5-star rating with a review. We know the majority of everybody consumes on YouTube, but we'd love to boost the visibility of our show on podcast platforms, and good ratings are the way to do that. So we appreciate everyone who has. You guys have been super generous and kind with your comments. Just take a few moments if you can, give us a 5-star rating and leave us a review. It really does help get the show in front of new eyeballs and spread awareness for it. And make sure back here on YouTube that you're subscribed to this channel, Sports Map Houston, and our other channel, Sports Map Texans. We'll have more content during the week and anytime news breaks. For Charlie, Josh, thanks for listening. Until next time, go Stros.